Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride Podcast, where we go deep on the sport of gravel cycling through in-depth interviews with product designers, event organizers, and athletes who are pioneering the sport. I'm your host, Craig Dalton, a lifelong cyclist who discovered gravel cycling back in 2016 and made all the mistakes you don't need to make. I approach each episode as a beginner to unlock all the knowledge you need to become a great gravel cyclist. This week on the show, we welcome Alexey Vermeulen. Alexey is a professional off-road cyclist competing in the Life Time Grand Prix series this year, with only one event left, Big Sugar in Bentonville, Arkansas, coming up this month. He's sitting in second in that competition. It was a great time to check in with Alexey. Alexey's not only a great athlete, but also a great ambassador for the sport. He always seems to be around to share a smile or a laugh after some of these big events. If you don't know him for his professional cycling career, you may have also seen him with a dog on his back, riding a bike. Yeah, we'll get into his relationship with Willie and what type of terrain Willie likes to ride. I'll give you a hint, it's the off-road kind. Before we jump in, I need to thank this week's sponsor, Athletic Greens and AG1. I've been using Athletic Greens for many years now, and I like to refer to it as my nutritional insurance. I don't always have the best diet, and it just gives me a baseline of some of the nutrients and minerals that I need throughout the day. One tasty scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic green superfood blend, and more. All that work together to fill those nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, and support a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. This is what I think I really love. It's simply every morning I have a routine. I get a scoop of the powder, put it over ice and water, shake it up, get some hydration in, get all those nutrients and vitamins in me in one fell swoop. Again, on days where I go deep on the bike, sometimes I'll do a second glass. I know for me, I start to feel sort of just run down and drained, and I don't have the luxury of sitting back with my feet up after a ride. I often have to jump right into enjoying my son and caring for him. So I love just being able to top off and make sure I've got my recovery. Athletic Greens is offering a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs to all my listeners with their first purchase. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/thegravelride and join health experts, athletes, and health-conscious go-getters around the world who are making a daily commitment to their health. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/thegravelride and get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. With that business behind us, let's jump into my conversation with Alexey. Alexey, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
I feel like this is a long time coming.
Yeah, since 2 years almost now?
Yeah, exactly. I remember when we met at Rodeo, I had asked Neil Shirley about just who was going to be there and who I might talk to. And he's like, here's Alexey. He's the fastest guy in gravel you don't know about yet.
Yeah, I think Neil believed in me maybe before I believed in myself. But I think that was my Rodeo Strava KOMs were the beginning of my success.
Put you on the radar. But you've been on the radar for a long time. So I always start off the podcast by just getting a little bit about your background. So why don't you tell us where you're from and how you got into cycling, and then ultimately let's talk about that journey into gravel and MTB territory.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this somewhat short. If we start at the beginning, I started in kids triathlons. My mom was doing them. As with any cyclist, I feel like hated this swimming portion. You just get to the run and bike, and you're like, okay, let's go. This is fun. Ran with my helmet on, my first triathlon. That was cool.
Amazing.
But yeah, I just kind of transitioned to my love of just going fast and pushing boundaries, right? I think I was 12, 11 at that portion. And my grandfather immigrated from Holland, actually grew up racing. And when he immigrated to Canada, didn't really continue. He did a lot of riding, but that kind of caught on at some point when I was doing triathlons. Remember this very vivid ride. I was on a 24-inch wheeled trek, and we did supposed to be a 30-mile ride, became 60, and completely bonked 10 miles to go. And the entire last 10 miles, I would fall back into his hand. He'd give me a push, and I'd spin as hard as I could, for a minute and a half. But I think as I grew up and started doing other sports, I did a lot of things, played hockey, played soccer, cross country. It eventually in high school fell to cross country and cycling. And I was, I think, somewhat naturally gifted. Just I enjoyed endurance and pushing myself, but it just became a a choice between the journey, right? Like cycling took me to new places. I got to go to Vermont to race Green Mountain Stage Race. I got to travel. We did family weekends. Cross
Did you
country
live
was
in a
great.
community? Did you live in a community that sort of embraced endurance athletics? Where were you?
So I grew up in Michigan. Yes, it's
Okay.
good job. You're good at this. Yeah, no, I grew up in Michigan, born in Memphis, Tennessee, but grew up in Michigan since I was 2 years old. And that's kind of like, I think, just where I was. Ann Arbor, about an hour south of Detroit. It's a big community for the Midwest, at least. There's a big Ann Arbor Velo Club was there, and definitely like, had the Tuesday crit practices. Like there was a pathway. Wouldn't say there was many kids my age, but there was definitely like, I remember I hear stories now about guys come up and talk to me and they're like, oh yeah, your dad used to drop you off at the local school and just say, don't let him get dropped. I'll see you guys at the other end. But I didn't know that, I was like, oh, I'm on this alone. I'm 12 years old. Look at all these guys, So there definitely was, maybe unbeknownst to me at the beginning, but there's a lot of hard Midwest guys that come out because I realize that even when I go back, you can't stop pedaling. Colorado, I'm like, oh, I got a 3-hour ride. I'll climb for 2 hours and descend and coast down. Michigan, you got a 3-hour ride. You're pedaling for 3 hours.
Yeah, it's so. I was talking to someone about this the other day. It's so different. Like even in California on the coastal range here, I get a lot of breaks where I'm not pedaling. So when I go somewhere where I actually have to continue to turn the pedals for 4 hours in a row, I'm absolutely crushed.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Every time I go back, I feel like I bonk every third ride. Probably my issue with not eating, but another story. But yeah, so it just kind of continued. Probably sophomore year of high school was like that deflection point. I won nationals, which I always say is somewhat lucky. Obviously, you can put in the work, but there's also 10 other guys doing it at a minimum. And that kind of opened up the financial side of it for my parents, where the national team covered and I got to go to Europe when I was 16, racing age 17 at the time. And European racing just fit me, man. I loved it. The Kermesse style, all out, just like if you're not in the front, you're in the back. It was everything I had dreamed. I remember I went over there with like 700 euro spending with my parents and like came back with like 1,400, like doubled it. And I was like, oh, this is great. And just like it was the first moment I remember like not thinking this is my career, but like, oh, I want to push harder because this is really freaking fun. And it's also, you get to be in Europe, right? Your friends are back at high school and you're like, you skip three weeks, you go home. But that trip that was supposed to be 3 weeks at Kermesse turned into going to the World Championships in Copenhagen because I did well. And so that kind of opened up this whole pathway to actually having a chance at something after juniors. So that was the World Championships in Copenhagen, 2011. Got to race with guys that I grew up watching, Cancellara, Cavendish, all these guys race up the same course I did a day earlier, which is just like, there's no words for it, right? Like when you grow up dreaming of something or like watching random videos.
Yeah, and unless you've observed or watched one of these things, you just cannot understand like the spectacle of having everybody racing with their country flags on their bodies, no trade teams. Like it's just such an amazing experience. I love, and I've had the good fortune of going to 2 world championships to watch, and it was just electric, both of them.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and I think it's something I'll never forget. And that kind of put me on a pathway, and to fast forward this, in cycling, there's a couple jumps, right? There's under 23. So when you're 18 years old, jumping into the next category, which is a 4-year category, but that also coincides with pretty much everywhere, college, university. And so I made a little pact with my parents, like, hey, if I have offers from one or both of the 2 big teams in the US at the time, which were Livestrong and BMC, which is coming on, that I could still apply, but defer college for at least 2 years through that contract and see what I could do. I was fortunate enough to have an offer from both and ended up choosing BMC because I just loved the racing in Europe and they had a schedule that primarily there. And it just kept growing. Like I feel like that first year on BMC, you're not making much, you're making 15 grand or something, but you're 18 years old, you're living in Europe with your best friends. And it was the first time I was like, wow, you can make this your job. Like that's like, where can this go? What can I do? And 3 years on, I was lucky enough to get an email from Lotto Jumbo and, it kind of transitioned and became the job. And it was that moment where I had completed this USA Cycling pipeline. And I was like, okay, so what's next? I signed this big contract and I was stoked. You're 21 years old and it's what you've dreamed of your whole life in a sense, but also felt like okay, so am I doing this for 15 years? Am I doing this for 10 years? It was I questioned a lot of it, right?
Were you, presumably in those BMC years, you were forced to live that professional lifestyle and begin to make significant sacrifices to continue progressing.
Yeah, I think BMC was lucky because you got to see it also, right? So we were the development team right underneath the pro World Tour team. You got to watch guys like Brent Bockwalter, who's American, and Larry Warbass go through their version of it, right? Like help you kind of pick, hey, if I actually make this jump. Where do I want to live? Do I want to live in Nice? Do I want to live in Girona? And kind of see, before you had to deal with it, see the struggles and see the positives of racing at that level. But yeah, like it just came down, once I signed that contract, I wanted more and more and more. And it was this weird feeling of like, unless you were winning, you couldn't do more. You couldn't make an impact on sponsors or people or community.
This is in the jumbo team at this point.
Yeah. Sorry. So 2 years on, and I loved it, right? You get to race these, like, we all dream of, like, Liège, Bastogne-Liège and Lombardia, Dauphiné, right?
Yeah, it's probably somewhat lost. It's probably somewhat lost on the listener. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're
somewhat
good.
Lost that's the big time, right? Yeah. You're on, I mean, everybody knows it now, but it's one of the biggest and best teams in the world. Yeah. You'd sort of made it there. Obviously, like, it continues to be a journey when you're a neo pro and you've got your first year in these big pro tour teams. But I think you were just getting into sort of this idea of, okay, now what's my identity? What's my role in this big organization in the biggest league in the world?
Yeah. And even in life, to be honest, right? You're 21 years old. I think if in hindsight, probably would have given myself my last year in under 23s. But like when you take a chance, like you don't turn down. Like at the time that I went, it had been almost 3 years since an American had gone to the World Tour. So it's one of those things that, like, when is the opportunity, if going to come again? And like, you're just young, right? You learn everything. Like, I remember my first moment, I chose to move to Girona, and I got a key mailed to me, and I'm like Google translating the back of a taxi in Spanish. Like, I think it's this address. And I'm like getting out, it's like 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. I'm like trying to find the lock, like eventually find where I'm going. And there's like life experiences at the same time that, back to not going to school, I like kind of feel like I was educated by the bike. Like, I learned a lot of like life balance. I don't know, just maybe not directly academic, but I learned a lot about myself in that time. And it kind of just transitioned into, when I was racing at the top level, what is next? What can I do? What do I want to do? And I remember, you kind of mentioned it quickly, if I wanted to go to mountain bike or not, but like, I remember thinking like, okay, I can continue doing this, maybe get better, right? Because I was 21, 23, but like I wanted to be a GC rider. That's what I'd grown up doing. And I kind of felt like I wasn't good enough in a sense. Like, you never know, you're young, but like, I was like, there's a lot of work to be done here to be able to climb like Andy Schleck or anything that I watched growing up, right? And so just, in 2018 was like, I kind of want to just go send it and see what happens. And I was good enough at the business side of it, or the connection side, that I had relationships with Bianchi and kind of took a lot of the sponsors I had on Lotto to back into the US and said, hey, I want to try this mountain bike thing. And very quickly realized that the World Cup mountain bike is the exact same as what I was doing, just different bikes and wider tires. But gravel was growing. And so I was trying to figure out where I belonged, and my identity had kind of changed. But that was the beginning of what I'm doing now, which there's things I miss, but I don't have any regrets. It's really cool to see what's growing in the US.
Yeah, no doubt. So to just unpack it a little bit, you move over, you get what may be easily described as a privateer program with Bianchi. You start trying the mountain bike thing, but discover it's sort of emotionally and maybe physically similar to what you've just been going through in the World Tour. And leaving the World Tour, you were looking to do something different and have a different relationship with your vocation as a professional cyclist.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think the biggest thing was that I wanted to actually positively impact either the companies I worked with or individuals, community around me, right? Like, athletics of any kind are very selfish. You have to be selfish on some level to grow as a person, as an athlete. But on the World Tour team, you have 28 riders, and you have these companies paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a part of this team. And rightfully so, the team wants one answer, not 28 different answers. And I felt like, well, there's 8 of us here who can actually make an impact on this company that's giving a lot of money to this team, yet you're blocking it. So I felt like there was kind of a backup or like a flaw in the system. Yeah. And not that I was the only one that ever saw that, but I was like, I actually like the portion off the bike as well. I like enjoying and talking. Like, it's not exhausting to me. I enjoy, being a human and talking through things. Hey, this worked, this didn't, or like, let's figure out how to do this better. I'm up for do that content, And so I saw that gap kind of existing in the US as things grew, but I don't think I ever thought it would grow into what it is now.
Yeah. And was that sort of, just timeline wise, was that the beginning of the pandemic that you had done your mountain bike thing and you were going to transition into gravel that 2020 season?
2019, I had 1 full year. 2019, I did a good schedule, mostly mountain bike, almost all mountain bike. But I like Belgium Off-Ride San Diego and flatted out of. And like, I was definitely that year. And even with my coach, we were all just like, let's just go test events this year and see what happens. Had to convince my parents I wasn't being an idiot. But other than that, it was easy. And it's just like, it was fun to start to build those relationships that we talk about now, right? Like I pride myself on not ever burning a bridge and like being able to go back to anybody. And like, I feel like I talk to companies I've worked with in the past, even just as a consultant nowadays, which like is kind of just cool to me. Like I enjoy like, this is doing well. This is not like, it's just such an interesting space to be in right now.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the athletes that can articulate feedback about the product and the experience, or even the vibe that companies are trying to create, that's gold, right? That's where you want to be spending your money.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a battle, as you know, like trying to figure out advertising is such an interesting thing, especially in sport, because sport is hard to quantify. And like the way I mean, like not to give away my secrets, but the way I kind of pitch this thing as an athlete it has to be at least three parts, right? You have to validate equipment on some level. And so that doesn't mean you need to win every race, but you need to be up there validating a new bike, a new set of wheels, a new handlebar. Like, does it work at the highest level? Why does it work? But I think that's, 30% of it maybe. The other part is just being a face for a brand, which you talk about vibe. Like it means like, not having some sterile company with a tent at an event, like talking through things, real life shit, having a dog, right? Like Willie's been we make jokes about it, but just such a conversation opener when you're just standing like, we all want carbon wheels. We're all buying them every day. No. So how do you just be a person? And the last is the internal feedback, right? That it just takes time and you have to work with a company for a long time for that to actually be beneficial, right? I think people are like, oh, Alexey had that bike a year before it launched, so he put all the feedback in. Dude, and I had feedback that'll affect the next generation of that bike, but it's so far in advance that to truly positively impact a company, you have to be involved really early on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think if you put all those together, that's the full athlete, doing well in the US and privateer.
And it seems like one of the things you recognized was this idea that, you will be required to create content as an athlete in this new space. And you took a very proactive vision on what that content was going to be and how you were going to show up.
Yeah, I tried to. I mean, I think it's, especially now, like you look at a race like Unbound, I feel like there is almost more videographers than racers sometimes, right? It's kind of, and content for content's sake is the bane of my existence. Like I hate to be in, like, even the way you and I just chatted before we started this podcast, like I struggle with podcasts that just jump in and say the same thing the entire time. Because if you have an agenda and you ask me the exact same questions I talked about last week on a different podcast, it doesn't benefit anybody, right? It's just content for content's sake. It's not that it's not going to be listened to, but you could go to some other channel and listen to the exact same thing, unless you give me the option to talk through things and figure things out and open up what I want to get to as well. So I think that's the same thing with what I took into content. I was like, what do I enjoy in this sport and why did I change what I'm doing? It's not that I was the best world tour rider. I was very far from it, but I have an experience at a different level and I enjoy the relationships. So I was like, that's what is interesting to me. So I just focused a lot on any content I want to be about relationships and how this works, like my relationship with Neil and Envy, like that's what's interesting to me. And then the humanity of the sport is what actually draws people in or inspires and motivates more than the next, hey, the lightest wheel set. Because you can find that on the web.
Quick follow-up on your dog, since not everyone is familiar with Willie, although they should be. Just describe Willie and why he's got a little bit of notoriety in the cycling world these days.
Yeah, Willie's probably the fastest known dog in the cycling world. No, but he's a long-haired miniature dachshund. Looks like a mini golden retriever, if you're trying to picture it. And early on in the pandemic, I started riding with him when my girlfriend did runs, and he just loved it. And it's kind of just grown. I mean, he's done rides as long as 7 hours. He gets out, goes to the bathroom, gets back in the backpack, and we just ride. But he's like, you got his head over one of your shoulders. And it's kind of like, it's great as a training partner also. Like I'll go ride 3 hours and come pick him up for an hour at the end. And I don't have to talk to anybody, but I kind of have someone there with me, like a little training partner, and no one yells at you on the bike path. So it's a win-win-win.
Does Willie have a preference between road riding and gravel riding?
He probably likes gravel more in Colorado because he loves prairie dogs. He loves hunting from up high. He's actually most into mountain biking, which I try to like ride trails before I take him there. But like he knows when he hates the goggles, but he knows when the goggles go on, it's like, there's going to be branches in his face. It's going to be time to focus. And he just like, he gets all four legs up on my shoulder like a parrot. And just kind of like, if there's someone in front of me, he is just like, his head is probably 3 or 4 inches in front of my face. And just like, he's trying to just like, we have to get back to them. I think he just loves the interactive nature of it. So I don't take him mountain biking that often. It's probably his favorite.
So podcasting is not the medium to really enjoy Willie in, but I encourage the listener to follow you on Instagram because I love it. Everybody loves it. Willie's a hero.
Yeah. He makes everyone smile, which is a goal in life. So it's good.
You also seem to have linked up with someone who is your frequent videographer partner. And that seems like to be like a really interesting relationship to give us insight into your comings and goings in your career and your successes and your failures.
Yeah, so that's funny. So like that was something I started last year. So Avery Stum, like he does almost all my photo and video that's not through another company. And even if it is, he DM'd me when I was back racing Iceman one year, which is a big mountain bike race in northern Michigan where I grew up. And we've just kind of weirdly just been on the same path. He moved out to Boulder about 3 months after I did. And I think we both have an understanding of what the other's job is to get done, right? I think there's a lot of cyclists who just expect, hey, this photographer will follow me and just take pictures. But like, it's not that easy, right? It's back and forth and hey, this is the gap. And it's annoying at times. And then the same as he understands, I have to get work done, right? So he'll just come, hey, I'm going to go out in the car with you for 4 hours. I'm going to ask you to turn around 6 or 7 times. But like, so we're able to create really cool content because we both are just in it because of our friendship less than money. If I were to like I've had people ask me this year, like, oh, what do you pay Avery? You pay him hourly? I was like, are you kidding me? That guy works more hourly with me than I think I could ever pay him in my entire life. But it's more because it's friendship, right? It's something that the relationship is the reason that we work together, not anything else. And so this year going in, that was kind of the goal. I went to companies and I was like, hey, I want to try to bring Avery to all of the races because to me, first off, you'll get pictures right after the race, which every company wants if you go do well. But more importantly, I want to show the relationship side of this, right? And a really good example of that is we made a video at Belgian Waffle Ride that I won this year in San Diego, but there was a moment in there about 2/3 of the way through where the person I had feeding me it's kind of shit the bed that day. It's kind of struggling. Sometimes you just aren't on the same wavelength. They keep missing you. They don't see your jersey, whatever it is. And Avery literally just stopped filming and handed up 2 bottles, which was like, I would have dropped out of the race, very honestly. And that kind of like moment, that's a relationship thing, right? If I'm paying someone to take pictures and videos, they're going to do that till the end of the day. But the relationship side of him knew, hey, my friend is struggling. Right. Feeding is more important than filming right now. And I will always cherish that because that's what matters more. And that's what moves the world go. That's what makes the world go round.
Yeah. When you were structuring your sponsorship agreements for this year, did you specifically carve out like a dollar amount for him and say, this is going to him to make sure he can get everywhere with me?
It was hard. Concepts proven are easier to sell, right? So this year I would say I spent a good amount of my own money getting in places because I believe in it, right? And so if anyone's interested, like we have a YouTube channel, just like Alexey and Avery, which I think it'll be at the end like 18 videos this year. But so I had, a couple companies that I think believed in what I was doing sign on, like Envy, for example. Neil was like, that's great. We need this. This is perfect. We want to add humanity to what we do already. And there's other companies that were less excited about it because the thought process in cycling has always been, we want to pay for this direct photo shoot, not for this like big ambiguous season. But I think also everyone this year has come back and now next year I've kind of stipulated it for everybody. Like, hey, if we're working together, I really need to ask you to put a percentage of like, I've pretty much said, a percentage of my paycheck you need to add in on top of to pay for Avery to come to races because you've all benefited from it this year. And if you haven't, then you need to show me where you didn't because it's just such a organic way of doing things, right? When it's more about the relationship of it and everyone's included, it's just fun. Like I took Avery and our friend Trafford. We had 2 videographers at Sea Otter and it was a blast, right? It was the two of us and Willie hanging out at the biggest event all year, right? Like just, I don't know, like the bike race is the smallest portion of it. And it's the biggest portion of my life, but it matters least. It's just the vehicle to all of us to go hang out at events, and the community of it is what is growing what I'm a part of right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think for the outsider, just to understand gravel, it's not about every section of the race and who's winning. It's about the overall experience. It's the pre-rides, the shakedown
Yeah.
rides, the post-ride hangout. That's what makes it so magic.
Yeah. And it's intoxicating, right? Like, I think that is the coolest thing. I had a quote the other day about, at some point in every race, the winner of the pro race is going to struggle just as much as the person finishing last. And I think that's
Yeah.
beautiful, right? Like, we're all riding on the same course and taking on these things. And it's just about the different journey, right? The struggle is going to be different, whether it's mental or physical or mechanical. But in the end, we're all going to end up sitting in the same place. And that is something that never existed where I was at the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get a little bit into the Grand Prix,
Yeah.
but along those lines, the Grand Prix, I mean, I think people, listeners going to know it's part mountain bike, part gravel racing as we think about it. When you, just to follow up on the sponsorship thread, as you designed your season, being aware of the Grand Prix and the requirements of having both a gravel bike and a proper mountain bike to race these races, how did you kind of figure that all out? Because I think you had alignment maybe with a gravel bike set up, and maybe
Yeah.
the mountain bike was like, oh shit, where am I going to get one of those?
Yeah. No, I think it's also, again, to start relationships, right? It's easy to leave the sponsorship thing and say, "Oh, look at this. This company has all the bikes I need and this company doesn't." But to me, longevity at a company matters more than getting what you need. If I have to go buy a bike, I'm willing to. But I was lucky enough to structure it so I ride road and gravel bikes from Envy, which is cool because it's just a past relationship I've had since I left the road. And I signed on with Factor for mountain bikes, which it's funny because both of those companies launched their bikes for the first time this year. So it's been a chaotic year, but it's cool. I mean, that's also the beauty of this is I feel like both companies in a weird way gain from knowledge that I learned of launching bikes on both sides, right? And even if they're not the exact same discipline, and it's weird to find space there because it doesn't really exist sometimes. I think I love that people can understand that. And as long as it's like written down and talked about, nobody feels like they're losing out because it's about growing the sport more than selling bikes all the time.
And how does the jukebox team fit into all this equation?
Yeah. So I got a complicated setup this year. Yeah. So Jukebox is a printing company in Vancouver, stickers, business cards, you name it, posters. We'll have many Willie stickers to come if you're wondering. But no, Laredo, who owns the company, he has an amateur team in Canada and he wanted to grow this, like the community side of it. He supports Israel Cycling Academy on the World Tour stage, but he had this idea of, hey, how can you tie athletes together with a title sponsor, right? So we all have, if you look at someone like Phil Guyman is quote unquote on this team, pretty much the only sponsor Phil and I have the same is Jukebox. And Phil's not racing and I'm very racing focused right now. But the goal is that you kind of have this traveling community that fits into all disciplines that you couldn't find the corners of without alienating anybody. So I think there's 5 or 6 people now, all from different backgrounds.
And is there any sort of, I mean, are you guys connected in any meaningful way? Like, do you train with Dylan Johnson here and there?
Not really train because we all live in different places, but like even like Big Sugar, we're all gonna be in the same house, just doing photo stuff and hanging out. And I think it's been hard to as COVID was still tailing off, like get everyone together because I think that's the goal. Like there's a lot of talk of getting everyone together in Canada and doing a training camp and things like that, which I hope happens next year. But this year it was very much focused on these guys are racing. I've seen Dylan and Ashton and Adam at every race because we're all doing the Grand Prix and that's how it goes. And then I haven't seen Phil once this year, but hopefully that changes, And then there's also people like, there's downhill and cyclocross racers that I will probably never see because I don't do those things.
Maybe Sea Otter,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Sea Otter, hopefully. But yeah, it's been weird, but I've actually enjoyed it because the non-endemic side of the sport is like when I talk about enjoying the business side and figuring out relationships, it's where it becomes more fun because it takes work and homework to actually figure out how to actually benefit that company.
Yeah, for sure. So onto the Grand Prix. I mean, presumably you found out about this towards the tail end of last year, and getting an invite to participate in the series was a big commitment. Obviously, there's 6 races on the calendar, half mountain bike, half gravel bike. It was really going to have to take the sort of cornerstone position in your calendar, I presume, for the year if you were going to intend on being successful.
Yeah. The Life Time Grand Prix has been I probably went into it a little more relaxed than I should have. I was excited about racing it, but also cognizant of how it can it's a long season and mentally it can really drain you. So, going into Sea Otter, I was probably a little undercooked and like kind of focused on just building throughout the season and being as consistent as I could. Back then in April, I was like, oh, I think you can finish top 10 in every race and finish on the podium. I don't think that's true. I think it'd be more consistent than that. And I also don't think anyone ever thought Keegan was going to be as dominant as he has been. And if in hindsight, I probably would have tried to peak a little more for different races. But I've had this thought process of just being very consistent throughout the year, not really peaking for anything, just trying to be fit and have a lot of mental freedom to not feel like I'm ever pressured. And so I didn't start racing until April because that was kind of the goal. I did one race in Michigan, Barrier Bay, before Sea Otter, but otherwise was pretty much very fresh. And then throughout the year, I've probably taken almost a month off the bike throughout the year, just finding that balance between things, right? Maybe it's not always off the bike, but not worrying about training. 10 days before Leadville, went to watch my girlfriend compete in the Commonwealth Games, which was incredible and maybe lost me 0.5%. But like mentally, I had this space to go from Leadville straight into like this very different block to get ready for the final races. And I think that's the biggest thing about this is I've, throughout the last 6 months or 7 months, said, okay, here's my calendar, here's the races. And if it's a mountain bike race, I'm going to spend most of my time on that bike before the event and do workouts that affect that, but hopefully hold this fitness and just kind of change little bits to be ready for different things. Got a big climbing race in Utah. Okay, do some longer threshold efforts. And then the minute Leadville in Leadville is obviously a big training camp just to be ready for altitude. And the minute Leadville finished, it was like, okay, full on 3 to 5 minute efforts. Endurance doesn't matter anymore. And that is somewhat the beautiful thing is once you get through Unbound, if you have like cycling such a build sport year after year that you can kind of hold endurance most of the year. I don't have to really focus on that during a week. And I can turn a lot of my rides into like, hey, how hard can I go? Because that's what these races become. Like if we want to talk numbers, like Schwalmingen, the 2-hour mountain bike sprint we just did was like 330 normalized for 2 hours. Just like it just on the whole day. And it's like something I dreamed of, but we haven't done it all year. So
it was such a gear shift just as a fan of the sport to see everybody now have to do like a 2-hour event. Like what the hell?
I loved it. Yeah. And then just like not to jump away from the Grand Prix quickly, but I think that was something that's interesting about my background is there's a lot of really strong guys in the Grand Prix, guys that I thought were going to stick out and are probably are coming around like Lachlan, Alex. Both of them have had some bad luck, but Rob Britton, even dark horse, in my opinion, Pete Stetina. You have a lot of guys that come from a road background and have this to do well at all these events. But I think moving 2 years earlier than a lot of those guys has made a difference for me because, dude, I struggle a lot with the technical side of the sport on the dirt because it's just different. On the road, you just expect you find lines and that's it. And there's a flow to it. Mountain biking and gravel riding is a lot more like you kind of like, hey, you're going to slide sideways and you're going to find your edge and then you're going to keep moving. And it's so foreign. And I felt like I really struggled for the 2 years before this and kind of found my feet at the right time with the Grand Prix. People always act like, for example, Leadville is a road race, mountain bike race. Dude, I disagree. Like when you're going 35 down power line on a hardtail with guys that are pure mountain bikers, you have to be able to handle your bike.
For sure. Yeah. And it depends on the weather that particular year. The year I did it, it was pouring with rain, which took another different skill set. I mean, people were just absolutely falling apart during that event. Yeah. Speaking of, I guess since this is going to publish in early October, we've got one race remaining. You're in second place in the Grand Prix. Keegan's obviously been crushing it all year, but I think there are a couple people within range that if he had a horrible day, like something drastic could happen in the results.
Keegan's theoretically safe now because he can drop a race and he's done so well. So Keegan has won the Grand Prix now. But second through, well, it's just because he can drop a race. So theoretically he could not, he has to show up, but he can have his worst result, and his worst result right now is 4th, which is insane. His first result is 4th at Schwalmingen after he crashed. So if he drops Big Sugar and finishes 45th, it still doesn't matter because he has more points than I do right now. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, Big Sugar being in Bentonville is like, it's known for sharp rocks, right? It's going to be kind of a race of attrition, put it all out there, but also be intelligent about it. For me, I'm definitely going to err on the side of insurance, like we talked about, inserts a little bit, little extra sealant. But I've tried to never go into any of these races thinking about the Grand Prix, because if you race to win, you'll be up there. I can't think about where Cole is or Pete or Russell. Doesn't help. I enjoy racing my bike too. So I think, theoretically, all of them, I think up to 7th could theoretically pass me. I guess I haven't really done math because it's kind of hard. Cole didn't race Unbound, so he doesn't have a drop race. So if he does worse than my 10th at Crusher, he can't beat me. But it's really up in the air until you finish, and that's been cool about the point system in a way for me. Yeah, it's hard to say. I'm for the first time this year nervous because I've really tried to not think about the Grand Prix until this point, because it's so up in the air, and you have one bad day. I pulled my front derailleur cable out at Crusher. So weird things can happen to anybody, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say that I'm happy that I was somewhat a mountain biker's turf in the mud for 2 hours in Wisconsin, and I fared. And so I think we're a little bit more to my benefit in Bentonville.
It's got so many punchy climbs in addition to kind of the big potential rock hazards there.
Yeah.
It will be interesting from a racing perspective, who's going to go all in early. Yeah. Does it stay together? How are you going to turn the screws to each other?
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I'm stoked. I think you're mainly going to see guys like Pete that is in 4th and Russell is in 5th try to make moves, because at least until we get to the end, racing wise to win the race, I have no reason to do much before then. But it's also easy to say till you get in that moment and it's pissing rain or something weird's happening and just becomes full on chaos for 5 hours. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird, and everyone's taking different paths to get there too. Some guys are still on mountain bikes. I kind of came back and immediately started doing, harder efforts to kind of get ready for a sprint finish. But yeah, in the end, yes, I want to finish on the podium of the Grand Prix, but I kind of want to win Big Sugar. Love Keegan to death. I would like him to not win another freaking race. So that would be the real goal on top, cherry on top. Finishing on the podium of the Grand Prix is great, but dude, that kid's been dominant this year. So yeah, that's probably the biggest goal for me.
And best of luck to him this coming weekend in the Worlds. Yeah. That's just insane that he's on that team right now.
I love that there is a transfer between gravel and road, because you do have a lot of guys come over here that I think because they're really strong on the road, they could just jump in. You look at Nicky Terpstra at Leadville. Obviously he's at altitude, he's not used to it, but it's not the same. You got to be able to put the whole package together to do a lot of these races and to get through a whole season of it. And I think the Grand Prix has been the hardest in that sense, right? That it's pretty much one race a month, and that's possible to peak for 6 races every month. You kind of have to pick and choose or just be consistent. Yeah, and I think the only person to do it perfectly this year has been Keegan. And I guess perfection was lost at Schwalm, but still, I would still say he was perfect.
We'll see. We'll see after Big Sugar, right?
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, I'm super excited to watch that race, as I said, and hopefully I'm going to be there myself to watch the action firsthand, or at least from way, way behind you guys.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And Bentonville puts on a party every time too, which I love. Right? It's just so much. It's all about cycling in that community right now, and it's intoxicating every time you go there.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to take a step back and talk about your other sort of big, I don't know if you call it your personal project, but I think it's just been a big part of your journey the last couple of years to Leadville and the From the Ground Up project. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I'm really bad about just giving a quick synopsis. So I'll start there. So From the Ground Up is, we take 3 riders who haven't been on a bike or haven't raced before to Leadville, the hardest mountain bike race in the nation, in my opinion. And the goal is just to make the sport less intimidating, more accessible through showing the questions and vulnerabilities of people who are going to struggle at the event, let alone the pros, because pros are stupid and don't show it, even though we all struggle. So it started in 2021 was the first season. We did the second season this year. When I say season, because it's a TV series on the back end, but it's this pathway of just learning how hard cycling can be, whether it's lingo or training or getting into the sport financially. And it's been something that I've been super passionate about and takes a lot of my time from January to August, but it validates everything. And the reason I left the road, it's something that it's easy to talk about making positive impacts on people, but also very, very difficult to do it while racing as a professional. And for the first 2 years, for 2018, 2019, I struggled with that. I would say it to companies, and then you get to races and you're like, dude, I'm getting flogged as it is, let alone trying to stand out here on my feet all day in the sun talking to people. And so it's been really cool to see COVID brought this whole new wave of people into the sport, and it allowed this access to people that literally didn't get on their bike because of Lance or Greg. They got on their bike because their gym closed. They needed mental sanity. And that is a very different pathway than anything we'd ever seen before. All of a sudden cycling was like a marathon. It was just to do it. It was just to accomplish something. And I think there was a little bit of a disconnect because of how elitist cycling can be, that we struggled to inform people that, hey, maybe Unbound isn't the best first race, or hey, maybe you should figure out how to change a tube before you take on this gravel race. But in all reality, it still became this big question of how do we keep these people in the sport and make it exciting? And that's what From the Ground Up has kind of been. It's trying to show that normal everyday people can take on the hardest thing in the world, or the hardest thing in the cycling world, in my opinion, then go on and, even if they don't finish, they can go on and take on normal races, and it's never going to feel very hard, right? Because you do the 100 at Unbound, it's hard, but it's not at 10,000 feet. It doesn't have 11,000 feet of climbing. It's not with descents. There's so much that grows. And I would equate finishing the Leadville 100 to doing an Ironman. And we have multiple people on film being like, oh, I finished 2 Ironmans and this was way harder, because it's so mentally taxing. It's a lot of it is mental more than physical. And that's really hard.
100%. Like my personal experience there was, I was about ready to quit.
Yep.
And honestly, like I think had my wife been at the feed station before Columbine, I might have quit, but I was like, well, I don't have a ride home, so I might as well continue going. And fortunately and miraculously, by the time I came back down, I was feeling good. I was like, I can make it home.
But that's how life is too, right? Like that's the coolest part of this, is at the same time, I go and race my race. I don't know how they're doing. And at some point on Leadville, if you don't know, it's an out and back course. So I end up hopefully crossing them if their days are going all right. And that's just so cool to me, right? That you can have these people taking on something for the first time, very much in the understanding of how impossible it is, and still towing them. That's motivating and inspiring, right? And like cycling is made for everybody, of all sizes, of all shapes, of all anything you want to name it, right? But we don't show that. We don't say it. It's very hard to talk about because it is primarily white, is primarily male, and you have to have money to be into it. And I think as that changes, we all gain value. Like the sport is more important, and it doesn't have to be about racing. You can be any type of rider, right? We have in our first season, Shauna, she stopped Leadville, I think at the Twin Lakes aid station, was like, that's it. But went and took on like fat bike nationals in northern Wisconsin, and like a different side of the sport. She doesn't ever want to race Leadville again, but bikes can be anything. You can go become a freaking bike commuter if you want. That's still, the vehicle of the bicycle is the cool part of the project.
Where can people watch the project?
First season was on YouTube. The second season was on Outside, but it's not behind a paywall. So, and there will be a third season. You heard it first here. But no, the hard part is, not to cut you off, like the hard part is figuring out how do you make it less overwhelming? Because every year you're like, wow, this is really sadistic. Why are we doing this to people?
Yeah. It's hard to imagine like someone not just off the couch, but just off the couch wanting to do Leadville. I mean, when they're submitting their application to you, they're submitting it to do Leadville. So at some level, they've decided they're willing to do it.
But they don't understand. And that's the beautiful part of it, right? They don't have any idea. And there's this process of like growing up, and 6 weeks out, we go to like a Leadville training camp, and they get to feel the altitude for their first time and ride the course over 3 days.
Yeah.
And it is, I cannot tell you how like just wide-eyed, like what the did I sign up for? And but none of them quit because they've invested so much of their life for the last 5 months into it. They're like, shit, I'm here, may as well.
The cards fall.
But yeah, I mean, that's definitely the balance side of it that I've enjoyed, is being able to do something like that, because you could never do that when you're racing on the road.
Yeah, it's a great, I don't know, series, I think is the right word to use. It's a great series. I watched it on Outside TV, and super powerful to, I mean, I'm always impressed when anybody takes on a journey that's bigger than themselves, whether it's a marathon or a gravel race or whatever it is. There's something absolutely admirable about someone who's willing to tackle something like that, knowing that like we may finish, we may not, but I'm going to do something huge.
Yeah. And I think that's the takeaway, right? Is that hopefully like there is a connection between cycling and life. And, we have those rolling hills, you come down Columbine and all of a sudden you feel okay again. And that's the reality of all of this. Like most of the days you train, you feel like shit. That is the majority of cycling. Like even as a professional athlete, 99.9% of the time is just bullshit. Get out the door, maybe convince yourself to get a coffee and stop for a couple minutes, but like get the work done and move on, because you don't feel great every day. And I think
someone said like, if if you're feeling good better than 30% of the time, you're probably not training well.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. But I think that's not what anyone shows on social media or anything else, right? It's always the good times. So yeah, my advice, get yourself a wiener dog and ride your bike.
I love it, which is the perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
Wiener dog promotion, which by the way, I will have another one. If I didn't already have 2 dogs, and that's a long story, we would have a wiener dog because that's my wife's jam right there.
Yeah. They're perfect. They're the right size. That's the true goal.
Yeah. My actual golden retriever does not fit well on my back and in a backpack.
See, but that is like my goal after my careers. I've told my girlfriend I want to get a golden retriever, not another wiener. So I could just be like, oh, this one didn't grow.
I love it. I love it. Thanks so much for the time, man. It's great to catch up. Good luck at Big Sugar. Hopefully I see you there.
Yeah,
and good luck at Belgian Waffle Ride, Michigan. I know that'll be a great one for you, being a Michigan guy.
No, thank you so much. It's exciting. And yeah, just hope the sport keeps growing. And thanks for talking through it.
Of course. We'll see you, my man.
See ya.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Gravel Ride Podcast. Huge thanks to Alexey for joining us. And big thanks to Athletic Greens and AG1 for sponsoring this week's episode. If you're interested in connecting with me, I encourage you to join the Ridership. Simply visit www.theridership.com. That's a free global cycling community where you can connect with gravel athletes from around the world. It's also your straight line to having a conversation with me, making episode suggestions, etc. If you're able to support the show, please visit buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride, or ratings and reviews are hugely appreciated. It really helps in me connecting with additional gravel cyclists. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.